Hi, welcome to our video interview today. My name is Mark Walker. I'm the co-founder of the Fintech Power 50. And today we're talking to Omar Onsi, who is the CEO and founder of NymCard. Hi, Omar. Perhaps you give us a quick overview of yourself and the company, please.
So I've been a tech entrepreneur for over 20 years now, and I started my career in the telecom space. My last startup in the telecoms business was back in 2008. It was something very similar to Skype out, but very focused on the MENA region, very focused on the migrant and expat communities across the region. So as you can imagine, half of that client base, we were the largest in the region by far. We had institutional investors from the Silicon Valley, all the regional ones with private equity offices and so on and so forth. The business was fairly large, and we had over 3 million clients, half of which were underbanked, and they couldn't log on to our website to purchase credit, right? So at that time, we hooked up with a bank and we started issuing virtual MasterCards, and that was growing so fast, but we were breaking every single rule when it comes to card issuance, because you cannot issue from one market cross-border. You need to have a local issuing license in each of the markets. And as big as the MENA is, it is very, very fragmented, right? In Europe, it's very different. You get a license in one European country, you passport that license across the whole continent, right? US, similar thing. The MENA, as promising as it is, as fragmented it is, right? So we started having that problem of finding like, who can we work with in each of those markets? Who's gonna issue those cards for us? Who's gonna do the BIN sponsorship, which is the settlement towards the schemes and all of this stuff? And it was a nightmare. And actually the project failed because we couldn't find all of those local partners. That was really the turning point, is that me as a tech entrepreneur, I said, you know what, that's exactly the problem that someone has to be solving. So at that time, I started NymCard to solve this exact problem, whereby we saw two issues. One, the companies that were issuing cards, we call them the issuer processors, they were all very legacy. They rely on a third-party vendor. It was a broken model. It takes ages to configure a card program and launch it. And then when it comes to BIN sponsorship, you need to work with a bank. The banks were very rigid, very hard to work with, very slow, and it just didn't happen. So these are like the two problems we started focusing on. We started building our tech stack ground up. It's a very big tech stack, so we own it all. It's our own intellectual property. That gives us really the flexibility. We published our APIs a couple of months back, all in a drive to remove as much of the friction as possible. And right now we're doing our partnerships with the banks across the region, so that the fintechs, when they come in, they don't have to struggle like we struggled. They just plug into us and we take them live across the MENA region.
Yeah, it's kind of really interesting. I guess it's the phrase that we use nowadays is banking as a service, isn't it? Where effectively what you've done is you've created a conduit, a platform that brings all of the different fragmented sections, as you say, of the MENA region together, so that as new fintechs come into play, they can then build on top of that and then offer their specific offers in particular areas.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's quite a big change, going from, somebody that wanted to actually be a card, run your own card, run your own sort of card issuing service, then into sort of a platform player. I would imagine quite a different type of business, because obviously, when you're looking at a card, you're probably looking at a consumer-based model, and then, you move into a platform. How did you find that sort of transition from, the B2C focus to the B2B focus?
Yeah, this was like for me, that was like $1 billion question, right? B2C versus B2B. And me being plugged in with the VC ecosystem and the fintech ecosystem, it took us, you can never claim that you woke up in the morning and said, I'm building a BaaS platform, right? It just evolves as you go along, right? And that switch from B2C to B2B was a big one, but the main driver was there's a big gap in the market. And the only way to scale this, if you want to be a regional platform, is a B2B setup. whereby you are the new infrastructure that other companies can ride on. So that defined the business model. We made the switch to a pure B2B infrastructure platform play, and we don't regret it at all. It's exactly what has been lacking in the region, is that B2B layer to be present.
Yeah, and I guess obviously, you would have looked when you were looking at the B2C sort of setup, you'd be looking at all the different regions, and I guess there's kind of fundamental challenges in each region for
Exactly,
particular
exactly, because of
consumers.
the fragmentation. So if you want to nail B2C in the MENA, you got to focus on one market. Max, if you're so good, like two, right? But it's really impossible to scale this across the region because of the fragmentation, right? Every country has its own taxation system, has its own legal system, has its own regulatory system. So it's extremely hard and time consuming. So if you are in a B2C, you really need to nail one, maybe two markets to really scale it. But if you are in a B2B, you are in a better position to have a wider reach to cover the region.
Absolutely. And sort of thinking about, obviously, you're now looking at various partners in all of these different areas. What are you seeing as the key trends sort of across the different areas? I don't know if you sort of have a bit of an overview of, what's happening in North Africa, what's happening in the UAE, that sort of stuff. Are you seeing fundamentally different business models coming up and different people using your services?
So one core change that I started seeing over the past 2 years is that there's a huge shift that's happening in this region when it comes to regulatory, and the interest and understanding of banks who are a core player in this, right? So if banks don't play ball with the fintechs, nothing would happen. Eventually, it's all about partnership, and we saw that in Europe happening, right? Many fintechs, when they first started in Europe, they were fighting banks, they wanted to close off banks, but eventually they all shifted to a partnership model. Now, the big shift that's happening in the MENA region now is that there's a strong drive by governments for more digitizing cash and removing cash and lowering the number of the underbanked and all of that. They realize that they need to update the regulatory frameworks, issue new licenses, be more fintech friendly. There's a lot of money that has been invested in fintechs. Imagine in a COVID year, which was last year, $1 billion was invested in tech startups and fintechs in the MENA region alone. So this is like a 180 degrees shift. If we were doing this 5 years back, we would have been, wasting our time. So a lot of changes has happened over the past 2 years, mainly on the regulatory side, governments and banks. So that created a whole new ecosystem, and you can see it in the news and the amount of funding that's happening with the fintechs, the tech startups coming on. So you will keep seeing that change happening even faster moving forward. So every year you will see more and more tech companies and fintechs launching innovative card programs. So going back to our own point, this is where we believe we are that layer that plugs in and make that collaboration happen.
Okay, it's interesting. And obviously you're effectively, because you were, I use the term born within the market, you obviously know a lot about the dynamics and everything else. Are you seeing a lot of other sort of banking as a service systems, say from Asia and from Europe, looking at the Middle East now? Because obviously it is such a new sort of hotbed of financial services. What are your sort of views on those other sort of banking as a service players coming in?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So my view is the following. You would see a lot of companies opening up an office in Dubai and saying, we're open for the MENA, right? This will never crack. It doesn't work. So if the management and the core team is 10 time zones away, nothing is going to really happen, right? So opening up an office in JLT and saying, hey, we're open and covering the MENA, and we've seen it over and over and over again. This region requires a lot of dedication. Everyone has to be here. The core management has to be here. This is what we're doing. We are in this region for the region. We're plugged into the ecosystem. We're very close to regulators. We're very close to banks. We're very close to the fintechs and the tech startups. We're very close to the ecosystem as a whole. The whole team is based here, right? So you have to really be plugged in the region to really be able to do that shift and create some change. But opening up a wrap office And the same applies to us. So if you open up just a rep office somewhere in Asia and we say, hey, we're open for Asia, it's not going to crack it really at the scale that you want it to.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. As you say, we see this, and I have conversations like this in many, many different places. And, the world is obviously getting much, much more global. Companies are getting much more global. But I think a lot of people are starting to realize that actually the situation and the business model and the team that you have in one country doesn't necessarily mean they're the right team to actually run the operations in another country as well, because of local dynamics, etc. and regionality.
Tech companies are very global, but banking is very local, right? And all of the ecosystem around that banking, it has to be as local as possible. It's key when it comes to financial services.
Yeah. And sort of just thinking about that, obviously from, the intro that you gave us earlier, your roots are very much in that sort of working with the migrant population and that sort of stuff. What do you see as your own and NymCard's sort of responsibility to sort of help out in some of the other regions that are maybe, there's a lack of financial education, there's the term, the unbanked, etc. What's your sort of feelings and thoughts about your role in that area of the business?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is that we really understand the NC, right? The B2C, that NC. We used to serve those guys, and we understand the struggles they had to go through to just get a payment card, a Visa card or a MasterCard, as simple as that, right? So that really reflected in the company's DNA and the team. So in our sales process or in our customer service process or even in the technical development side, we always look at that C. How's the experience going to happen? How's the onboarding process? How's the KYC going to happen? And then we ask ourselves the question, what is the API that we can put out there that would remove that friction, right? For our client who's serving that C, knowing that that C is an underbanked client himself, right? So you will see it in our platform and the type of APIs that we worked on and developed that would facilitate a KYC process for an underbanked, that would facilitate the KYC process for someone who doesn't have a bank account, rather than using cash agents. So we are one of the very few, of not the only, BaaS player with functionality to load through cash agents, because that model doesn't make sense in Europe, it doesn't make sense in the US, but it's crucial for the MENA region.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that. There's a couple of other regions around the world, a couple spring to mind, like Cambodia and the Philippines as well, where that whole concept of cash agents is ingrained into society and into culture. And it's very difficult for a European CEO or a European business to kind of get their head around why would you do that? Exactly. So to actually be able to offer it is, again, it's one of these, the challenges that if a large tech company is coming into a new place, they can't get their head around that and they don't offer it. And then they wonder why things are not working for them. 100%. So yeah, 100%. It's a really interesting sort of dynamic, I would say. So obviously we don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you're a very busy person, but just as a sort of final thoughts, what's the future going to hold for NymCard? What are the key priorities that you're working on this year?
Well, it's all about removing friction to enable that innovation to happen, right? So we are not happy with the amount of innovation that has happened so far, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We see things changing super fast, and we want to make sure we are a major facilitator in that movement, right? So there's a lot of money going around. The mentality is there. The regulators are there. The government push. Everything is aligned. What we need better infrastructure. So we just want to make sure we build that proper infrastructure at scale to scale for the whole region. That's like our driving North Star.
Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Omar, for taking the time to speak with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.